Hi guys, my name is Arden Gunnell Jr. and you may know me on my channels as nedragunn or from the band Loaded Gun. It's a new project that I'm doing. But aside from that, this video is about me being an alien abductee, and I have been visited several times over the years, and I wanted to basically go into some detail about how this all went down, when it started, and try to give some answers, maybe so I could help others, come to the forefront with disclosure. Um, it's really relieved a lot of my anxieties that I've had for a long time. And I think that it is key for us to be able to move forward as a society, as a civilization, as humanity in this day and age, where we are constantly facing ridicule from people that don't want to believe that there are other entities or other civilizations out there in the universe, when in fact that is actually the case. So my first, the first time that I had an interaction, or my first, I guess I want to say abduction, but more of a visitation, happened when I was 8 years old. I was living in a trailer park with my family, my dad, my mom, my older sister, and my two younger brothers, and my youngest sister from my dad's side. Sorry. They were all present for that visitation, or they were in the house at the time that it happened. And I would ballpark and say that it was probably around 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe 4 o'clock, that it happened. And what had happened is I went to sleep in my sister's room, and I don't believe that she was in the room when I went in there to sleep. I think that she came home later and laid down in that bedroom. But when I went to bed in there, she wasn't there. So I was laying near the wall. The bed was in the corner, and I was laying near the wall of the bed. And I remember waking up, and I was sitting in a chair in the living room, which was like a blue, I want to say like a light blue, grayish blue lazy boy chair. That it was a swivel style lazy boy. Let me show you real quick here, because I have one here in our house. If I could just take some of the blankets and stuff off of it to kind of give you an idea. So here is a chair. This one right here is one that is very similar to what I was sitting in when I was 8 years old. And so what had happened is I woke up, and I'm sitting in this chair. Let me get my finger out of the way, sorry. So I'm sitting in the chair, and I got my back flat. I'm just sitting with my arms straight down here. And I look over to my right, and I see the window. I see our TV that was on the counter. I see all the plants that were over to my immediate right on a shelf. Directly behind me was a bunk bed where my younger brothers and sometimes my sister would sleep. She would usually take either the top bunk, or she would sleep in my parents' room back down the hall. And then my brothers would usually just pair up and sleep on the bottom bunk because it was bigger, and they would split that. So they were like I want to say 7 and 6, or possibly, yeah, I would say about they were around the ages of 7 and 6. We're all 14 months apart, so 8, 7, 6, and so they were in the bed behind me, sleeping. Which I later found out that they were awake while this was happening. But anyway, so I look off to my right, and I don't see anything there. I just see, you know, the TV and the plants in the window. There's a swamp cooler in the window that blew air into that living room, bedroom area. And then on my left, I look over, and I can see the doorway. And standing in front of that door was a shadowed figure at first. So this figure, I want to say, it stood probably about this high, maybe about this high. So I want to say probably about 4.5 to 5 feet tall. And literally it was just this large, almost like the shape of a light bulb, like an incandescent light bulb, you know, like the type you screw into a standard fan or whatever. That was like the shape of their head. So if you can see this, I've got a tattoo on my wrist. That's what it looked like. That's what its face looked like right there. And so that was standing off to my left, shadowed out. And then as my eyes adjusted on it, I could see that it had like a grayish hue to its skin. And, you know, slightly there was like a slight shine to it. The moonlight was coming through the door. We had it wasn't a standard window on the door. It was like a triangular shape. It was a triangular shaped window, and I remember it was a triangle that pointed upward. And I clearly remember this because I remember the triangle pointing up, and then the alien's head was literally the opposite direction, almost like if you were to take a triangle and face it downward, it would, you know, go the opposite direction. So I clearly remember it being lit up. So the light was coming in from behind it, and it was cascading over the sides of its face. I could see the large eye here. I could see it here from the light that was coming into the room. It had a very small, straight mouth. It was not open at the moment, just a very small slit, maybe about that wide. And its nose was like straight up and down, like if you were to take your nostrils and pull them up like this. It literally looked like that, but like flat. There wasn't any kind of bridge to its nose. It was just flat and like two slits on its face. And there was no hair. I didn't see any muscle tone. It was literally like just a form of a figure and skin covering it. No eyelids that I could really see. Sorry. And so it was standing there, and so I got scared. So what I did is, let's say I'm in the chair. This is pretty close to what I had, except this one doesn't swivel. But I put my feet out, straight out, and I kicked to the right. And when I kicked to the right, I spun around like this. And as I spun around, I did a full 360 rotation, and the chair almost, started into another rotation, and I felt something grab the back of the chair, and it stopped. And when it stopped, I felt a hand go on this part of my neck right here. It grabbed me and pushed me forward, and then I felt something poke me back here in my back. Right by where my right kidney would be on my back. And when it did that, I could literally feel, when it poked me here, I felt this worm feeling, like it was almost like something was going up, up through my back, all the way up to the middle of my spine. I could feel it under my skin. And at that point, I started to get I don't know, it wasn't like cold, but I felt like I was in shock. And so when that happened, I passed out just immediately. I was out. Then I woke up again, and I'm back in my sister's room. Now this time, she's actually there. I can see that she's in the bed, and I shake her and wake her up and say, "Hey, you need to wake up. Something just happened." And as I'm doing this, I can see my breath coming out into the room. I can feel the air in the room. It feels like it's like a deep freezer. It felt like it was like 20 degrees in that room. It was ridiculously cold for being out here in Arizona. Um, even overnight, when we usually see like the 60s or the 40s in the outskirts of town, we were in Mesa. We were staying in what was the name of the park? It was something grand. Anyway, it was in between Main Street and Pepper Street, off of Extension in Mesa, Arizona. The park was literally like right behind this place called Larada's, Larada apostrophe S, Army surplus, like a big yellow building, 2-story, in one part of it. But anyway, so like we were in this. Oh, I think it was called Grand Royale, which is kind of, I think that was the name of it, or Royal Grand or Grand Royale Park. Which I thought was funny later because it's the Beastie Boys thing, but anyway, I believe that that's what it was called. And so anyway, I wake my sister up and I tell her what just happened. And I said, "Hey, look, something was out in the living room. I was out there with it. I went to sleep in here. I was sleeping in here for some, I don't know, for some reason I ended up in the living room sitting in the chair. I broke a lot of stuff. I remember kicking something. I think I broke something out there. I don't know what they did." And I told her about them putting something in my back, and she just looked at me with this like blank face, like, "I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Like your imagination just must be like really, just overactive, or it was like that look, like, really, like, okay, what are you talking about?" And so she was kind of like taken back by it, but she reassured me that she was going to go with me and check out the living room. And so she walked with me out there, and as we walked out to the living room, everything was destroyed. Like all of my mom's houseplants, kicked over, broken. There was soil and pieces of plants, and what was left of it. It was just scattered all over the carpet, all over the shelving that she had set up. There was just a massive mess. And so my sister was kind of thinking like maybe somebody broke in. Maybe he is telling the truth about these beings or somebody being here. And so she said, "Well, you know what? What I'll do is I'll stay up with you until the sun comes up, and then I'm gonna go back to bed." It's like, okay. So she stayed up with me until the sun came up, and then I got ready for school, and I went to school. I think I was like in 2nd or 3rd grade. I think it was 3rd grade. That would have been, I think it was Emerson was the name of the school, over by Carson Junior High in Westwood. There's an elementary, middle school, and then a high school. So I would walk there, going down Extension, and then over, I think it's on University. Yeah, so I would go up Extension, then over to University, and then I would go to school. And then we had like a half day that day, so I came home around 11 in the morning, and when I got home, my mom was up, and she was out in the living room cleaning up the mess. And I remember her cleaning up, one of the particular plants that I had broken or kicked over was a little, like a potted plant. The actual pot itself was like one of those plastic pots you get for arts and crafts, when you're, I think a lot of the schools did them back then, like in, when would this be, 91? I want to say like 91. 1991 is when this happened. And so back then it was like a big thing, for the kids to all decorate a house plant, potted house plant, pot. And It had a little clear plastic acrylic around it, and you would, decorate like a liner that would go inside of it, and then you would put the actual like plant backing inside of it, like the pot itself. It would go around this acrylic, or inside the acrylic, and it would hold that decorative label. So I remember seeing that was one of them that I had knocked over amongst some other ones. And I told her what had happened, and she gave me like that same kind of like awkward stare, like, what are you talking about? That my sister did. And so at that point I was like, well, nobody's ever going to believe me what I say. They're not going to understand where I'm coming from, or they're going to think that I'm nuts, or that I'm making stuff up, that I've got an overactive imagination. And so I kind of just like put it off in the back of my head, and I didn't think much about it. Well, I want to say, gosh, this was probably when around the time I met my wife. I want to say like maybe a year or two into it, we'd had my daughter. So this would probably be about 2009, 2010. So we're looking at 7 or 8 years ago. My brothers and sisters had gotten together at my mom's house, and they were discussing that same night. And my mom gives me a call and says, hey, you should really come over and, hang out. We'll have some drinks, whatever. And I was like, okay, I'll come by and hang out, whatever. Well, I get there, and it turns out that my mom had been talking about that night with them because they brought it up. And what she wanted to know is my side of the story. She wanted to reaffirm everything that I'd said that night. Well, what she ended up finding out and putting all together is that night, my brothers and sisters were awake. They could not move. They were in like a paralysis. Not sleep paralysis, but a conscious paralysis. They were completely aware of their surroundings, but they could not move anything except for their eyes. They could look around. They could not scream, talk, nothing. They could just look around. That was it. And what they saw is that there was 2 of them in the room, or in that living room with me. There was the one that was over here to my left. There was the one over there that I saw by the door. The one that I didn't see is the one that stopped the chair, that was standing right behind the chair. So when the chair came around full circle here, it literally grabbed the chair and stopped it after I did like a full spin. And so I'm thinking that I'm going to like kick this being or alien over by doing this little spin kick thing, 8-year-old, mentality. I'm thinking I can stop it by doing that. In all reality, there's a second one behind me that's waiting to inject me in the back with some kind of worm-like material. I don't know what it was, but I felt it crawling under my skin. It was cold, and it felt really weird. It felt like a worm just wiggling its way all the way up from right by my right kidney up through my back. So anyway, my mom, she takes a moment and goes over that information with me, and she says, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry about the way that I acted before and not treating it like you were really being serious, that it wasn't a serious matter. And she says, I realize now, after speaking with your brothers and sister, or sisters, I should say, because she talked to my big sister too. We've got Melania, is my big sister, and then Forrest and Carl and Kat are my younger brothers and sister. She had spoken with them, and she said, I'm sorry. I talked with all of them, and we've realized that this was a true event. It really did happen. And your brothers and sister said that when you were in the living room, what they saw is that there was 2 aliens. They couldn't speak or move. All they could do was look at them. And the way that I got from my sister's bedroom out to the living room, and then from the living room back to the bedroom, is that they had me levitated. I was on my backside laying down, and I was literally It was like literally like I'm laying flat on my back, except they had me about 4 feet off the ground, just straight up in the air. So I was like floating across the floor, or across the ground, you know, like 4 feet up. And they had this bluish green light that was wrapping around my entire body, while they had their hands out, and they weren't actually touching me. They just had their hands like off to the sides of me. And when they were doing that, they had me lifted up, and they were controlling my body and taking me down the hallway, back to the bedroom. You know, and they saw them bring me out to the living room first, and then I went back to the bedroom. So that's when I was 8. When I was 12, I had one come back. It wasn't a gray. This one was like a purplish kind of color. There's a cartoon that came out on MTV back in the early 90s on MTV's Oddities, and it was called The Head. I believe it was Jim and Roy. Roy was the alien, like a purple alien. I swear it looked almost exactly like that, except it had more like spikes all the way around its face, you know, all the way in front of like where the ears would be. It had a wide, short head, so its head, like if its head started here, it went up to about right here, the top of it, and the width was like out here over to here, so it was like this short and wide skull structure. I could see like it had larger horns on the top, and then it had a lot of small horns all the way around its entirety of its face, around the chin, on the sides of the face. It had the black eyes as well, but they were more like how the shape of my eyebrows come down. It went like up like this, and then it had this dip, and then it kind of came back up. So it was similar to the grays, but it wasn't exactly like the almond kind of tipped eyes. It was like a really devious looking, scary eye, and I could see it. This thing was in my room, and just my luck, they tend to get me when I'm most vulnerable, when I'm trying to sleep. So I'm laying down, and I look off to my right, and I can see this thing just on my right side. I could see it just looking me dead in the eyes, and I started to try to scream, and when I opened my mouth, I could literally not scream. I couldn't move. I was in complete shock. It was the most terrifying moment, or I should say, like, one of the most terrifying moments I've ever had in my entire life was that second encounter. This happened. Let's see. I was 12 years old, and let's see. I want to make sure I get my timetables right. So 12 from 83, we would have been looking at 1995 roundabouts, maybe rolling into 96. I remember because it wasn't even like a full year. I think it was into 96 because I was already 12. I feel like I'm screwing up my times here. Yeah, so it was into 96. Because I remember it wasn't even a full year later that the Phoenix Lights happened, which was pretty close to where I was living. So this thing is on the side of my bed, and literally, like, as soon as I tried to start trying to scream, I felt my whole body just like lock up, like something grabbed me completely around my entire body. And when this happened, I started to feel my head expand and contract. Now, I don't know if I can make that any clearer. Think of like putting an egg into the microwave, and then just cooking it, and then you can see how the shell will start to expand from the inside of the egg will cook, and it causes the pressure to push everything inside outward. And as it did that, it felt like my skull, I could feel all the bones in my skull just pushing out, and it felt like my head got like out to here, like a balloon, like somebody just blowing into a balloon and just pushing air into it and then letting it out, and my head would come back down. And then it did it again, and then it would come back down, and did it again, and it did it 4 times. And it was just this excruciating pain. So not only was I in like absolute terror, not knowing what this thing wanted from me, because it was a completely different alien from the first ones. This one, it seemed way more sinister. I could see that it had very sharp teeth in its mouth. It was smiling, just kind of looking at me like that, like with this dead blank stare. And as it was doing that, my head was just expanding and contracting, and I could smell the room. It smelled like wet, like like mold, water, like moldy mildew, just like that odor. It was horrible. It was almost a cross of like urine and like mildew and something moldy and almost like rotten. I don't know how tall this thing actually was, but it looked like it was like only like 3 feet, maybe 3.5 feet tall, based on where it was at my bedside. But I could speculate that maybe it was kneeling or sitting down next to the bed, and that it wasn't actually standing up, which is a pretty good idea of what may have been going on, because I think that it was kneeling and it was trying to get close into me to perform whatever it was doing to my brain and my head. And then as soon as it was done, it just disappeared and it vanished out of the room. As soon as I could move, I ran. I turned on the quickest light I could, which was, I had my bedroom light, but I wanted to get out of the room, so I just grabbed my door handle and pulled it open, and the hallway light was on out, in the hallway. My mom's room was directly across the hall from my door, and she had her door locked, so I was just like kind of looking for whoever I could find that might have been up. And I knocked at my mom's door. There wasn't an answer. I tried to see if somebody was home. My sister's room was directly next to mine on my side of the hall, and I don't believe she was home. I think she was out with her friends. And so I just kind of stayed up and tried to ride it out as much as I could. So not even like a year later, I believe that I was about 12 or going into my 13th year. Yeah, so I was still about 12. Let's see here. 96. 96. At the end of 96, I would have turned 13. And I remember I was 13 when I went up to Utah. So I think that was summertime of 97. And if I recall, the Phoenix Lights were in March of 97. If I remember right. So we had the Phoenix Lights. They appeared, and we were all standing outside just kind of wondering what the hell it was. None of us knew. We all had our speculations, we all had our doubts, but we also had our ideas of it. And I was probably struck the hardest out of everybody, in my family, in the neighborhood, because we were all kind of standing outside. Back then, we used to ride our bicycles around the neighborhood and, stay out until the lights came on. Sometimes we'd be out a little later. But when these lights were out, a lot of us were outside just playing out front. As long as I stayed out, near the front side of my house, I was pretty good about doing that, and my parents wouldn't have a problem with it. I should say my mom and my stepdad. So this is about 3.5 years after my father passed away. And so I'm standing outside looking at the lights and watching them just cruise across the sky. Back then, to me, it looked like they were like a mile wide. I could be wrong. That's just what it looked like to me. It looked like it took up about 5,000 feet in the sky, but they were just these huge lights, and I remember it was like a V shape. Like you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7, and you had this V shape. Now I also remember that there were some big looked like flares that dropped out of the sky, and they were kind of steady. They went really slow, but they were huge, and they would drop real slow like this. I think there was at least 4, maybe more of those that were up in the sky, but they were not part of the lights that were there. And so, a lot of us, we just watched it happen, and later, we saw news reports about it, and there was a lot of ridicule from the governor, Fife Symington, that he kind of pushed back onto the rest of us here in the valley. And he brought out some, fake mock-up alien, or person in an alien costume with handcuffs on, saying that we caught the perpetrator or something. So a lot of us took that as, a slap in the face. And then I went to Utah, and I believe that was summer that I did that. And when I went up to Utah, we went up to stay at my uncle's cabin, my Uncle John, and then I was there visiting him and my cousin Johnny and Josh, were my 2 cousins. Josh is older than Johnny, and I finally met my paternal grandmother, Betty, who actually passed away. So that was my dad's real mom, because he was adopted. So we were there visiting him. My mom came with us, so it was me and my mom, my brother Forrest and Carl, and my sister Kat. We all went up there, took a plane up, and while we were there, I believe we were staying in Salt Lake, and then we took a trip up to Provo and Ogden, and I can't remember which one it was. I think it might have been Ogden, where my uncle had his cabin. But I remember when we went to the cabin, we didn't have much to do. All we could do was play Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! And on the Nintendo, or basically just kind of wander around aimlessly outside, in the rocks and dirt that were outside the cabin. And I remember we had a fire going outside. That night, my cousin Josh was standing too close to one of these construction lights. It's like a halogen light, on a tripod. And my uncle kept telling him, don't get too close. It'll catch you on fire. It has a potential to set you on fire. And so my cousin Josh kept telling him, yeah, whatever, I'm not that close. I'm just standing here to get warm. And he eventually lit his shirt on fire. It caught his whole back on fire, and he had to tear his shirt off and stomp it out inside the house. But anyway, so after that it all went down, we decided to go for a walk outside. And so it was me, Josh and Johnny, and then Forrest and Carl. I believe Kat stayed with my mom and John in the cabin. And so as we're walking around outside, we decided to start walking toward this hill that's off to the side of the property. And as we do that, the sky lights up like a dark blood red. And as that happened, we start hearing a mooing of a cow. A cow starts mooing really loud. You can hear the this, making this noise. Let me plug my phone back in here. So as this is happening, a lot of us are freaking out. dude, what the hell's going on? You know, what's this? What's all this moving about? And I kind of looked at my cousins, and I'm like, you guys have cows on the property? I didn't know you guys had cows. Uncle John has cows? And they're like, no, we don't have cows. There shouldn't even be one over here unless there's like one that's loose. But, you know, the next farm was like 5 miles down the road, at least. So we went up there, you know, like just up to the beginning of the hill, and we're like, nah, screw that. We're not gonna go up there. I don't even know why that's all lit up the way it is. I'm freaking out, and I had like a gut feeling about it. I'm like, no, we're going back to the cabin. We're gonna, you know, stay somewhere where we're inside and we can be safe. So we get back to the cabin. You know, we all play some video games, play some more Punch Out till we got tired and went to bed. And we get up in the morning, and you know, we do our routine. I remember some mice got into the cereal that my uncle and my mom bought, you know, the night before when we went up there. And so they were yelling about that, and that the mice got into the cereal, that we'd have to make some other food because now the food was, you know, the cereal was tainted with, you know, mice, whatever. So, while they were making up some breakfast, we decided to go outside and take a walk. And we ended up going up that hill where the red light was at, and we heard the cow mooing. So we go walking up the hill, and we find a cow that's literally like, it's laying down on the ground. And I remember looking at it and thinking to myself, what the hell happened to this cow? It was just, if you've ever seen meat in a package, you know, everybody's seen it. Like the saran wrap, if you were like to like wrap beef. That cow, I guess that's the closest way I could say it. Its skin looked like it had been like rewrapped in like shrink wrap, but with its own skin. There was no like weight to it except for, you know, the organs that were left inside the cow, its bones, but it looked like it didn't have any blood. And I remember looking at it and thinking, it has everything to do with that red light we saw last night. And then I told my cousins and my brothers, I was like, this is a cow mutilation. Like, seriously, this is what we're looking at. And we all just kind of stared at it, and we just couldn't figure it out. We were looking for markings, we were looking for something to tell us that something else happened to this cow other than what we all thought, you know, deep down in our guts, like, in our heads, like, we knew what happened, but we were trying to discount it. And so we ended up going back and we tell my Uncle John about it, and he was just kind of like, you know, stay away from the cow, is what he told us. You know, don't go up there. It probably had a disease. You know, it's probably sick, whatever. It probably wandered away from a farm and it got over here and it died. And I was just thinking to myself, I know that he's full of it because, you know, for one, you know, he told us not to go back up there and go around the cow. And then two, there was no way that a cow could get to his property just because of the location he was. It was up, you know, more near like a mountain range area, and it would have been way too difficult for a cow to even get up to that area, let alone do what it did to, you know, if it did that to itself, there's no way it could have done that to itself. So I was thinking, yeah, so whatever. I knew that he was full of it. He was just giving us a reason to stay away from the cow, which I wanted to. I didn't care. And so we ended up wrapping up that trip. We came back home, and that was the end of that for that time. So a few years passed, you know, and I was 18, living out in East Mesa on 98th Street in University. The address was 431 North 98th Street in Mesa, Arizona. I can't remember the zip code. I think it was like 85207. I think they changed it since then. But anyway, that's the address. It's like a Pueblo style house. in a kind of a normal style neighborhood, way far east, Mesa. And so I'm there, and I'm laying down in my bed, and and after all this time, I'm thinking maybe I'm having like a sleep paralysis or night terror. And so I wake up, and I'm laying down, and let me go ahead and adjust this here. So I'm laying down on the bed, and I can see down my right arm that it's been cut, literally all the way down my arm, and then up all the way to my wrist. And all the skin that's on the outside of my arm, sorry about that, all the skin that's on the outside of my arm is all hanging down onto this big metal tray that's underneath my shoulder, goes all the way back here, and it was laying all the way out here. And on my side, there's an alien that was like kneeling next to the bed. At first it was standing, and then it started to kneel again, and I could see it using this, had a big hypodermic needle, probably like that big around, and maybe that long. It was glass, like a glass tube, and it had metal on each end, and then like a casing, like strips that connected from each cap, each end, so you could still see all the way through the glass. And then you could see the plunger that went through it, and then another metal ring inside for the actual plunger, and then a big metal tip for the needle that was on the end, and this needle was like this long, and it was going to stick it into my arm, into the muscles of my arm. And so that was in one hand, and then the other hand it had like a cutter grabber. So these top two, they were angled like this, like curved, like that. And then there was a bottom one that came up like a little claw, and it went in between these other two like this, like that. So it would like grab and cut, So it was using it on the tendons and the muscles in my arm, and like I could see it cutting them all the way down, and then it was somehow like moving them to different locations. And then as it was doing that, it was using that hypodermic, like huge hypodermic needle. It was sticking it into those tendons as it was moving them, and it was injecting some kind of like a green fluid into it, like a greenish blue fluid, into my arm. And I could see the tendon or muscle. It would basically like latch on, and then it would turn into like a solid piece. So it would go from like a bunch of little fibers where it sliced it, and then they would just kind of come back together, and it would solidify, and it become like one strand again. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe it's fixing my arm because of the injury that I had earlier that week. Probably about 5 or 6 days before that, I had taken my right arm. Back then I was like really violent, and so I would punch a lot of things, and smash stuff and punch things and put my hand, my fists through the walls, and so I had really done a number on my arm. And so I ended up getting my arm repaired by them, and that's when something clicked in my head. I was like, okay, well, maybe the Greys aren't here to hurt us. Maybe they're here to help us. These other ones, like the one I saw when I was 12, that was obviously doing something just to put the sheer terror into my head, but also to hurt me physically, in like a telepathic way, because it didn't touch me. It was just the way it was staring at me. It was focused on me, and it was hurting me. So when this Grey came back, it did this. Now there wasn't any kind of blacking out or anything that occurred afterward. I was wide awake the entire time it was working on my arm. And I remember as soon as it was done, it just kind of like shot straight, like it looked like a beam almost, like it disappeared and kind of shot through the ceiling. And as soon as I could, I stood up. And I was looking at the clock the whole time, as this was going on. And when it was done, it was 8:38 in the morning, and I think it was like June 22nd, on a Saturday at like 8:38 in the morning of 2002, I believe. So I would have been like 19 at the end of that year. And so yeah, so it disappeared. And of course, this time I'm not scared, so I'm like wanting to tell somebody, and I'm just running through my whole house. I ran directly out my bedroom door. I go down the hallway. I look through the center room, which is like, if you ever see the layout of this house, you'll understand. It's got one room where there's two doors, one on each side, and you can kind of pass through from one side of the house to the other going through this room that was at one time used as an office that ended up becoming kind of like a impromptu bedroom. Sorry. So anyway, I'm running through the house, I'm looking, finding nobody, and as I'm getting to the other side where there's actually like outside windows, that's when it hit me. Because, when I saw my clock, I just thought 8:38, it's nighttime, kind of early. I get out to the main living room and I realize that it's daylight, middle of the day, or middle of the morning actually. 8:38 in the morning, not at night. And that's when it really like sunk in that it doesn't matter what I do, that they're going to come to me, they're going to find me, they're going to keep coming back as much as they want. And yeah, so that's when it really hit me that there's no way I can really, get away from them. They're going to get me daytime, nighttime, doesn't matter where I am. If the doors are locked, they're going to come through however they can get through. They don't need to come through a door or a window. They can just materialize, as I watched it, dematerialize right there in my bedroom. So that was when I was 18. When I was 22, I had another encounter, but first, I'm going to show you something here. So, during my 18th year, I noticed that there was a mark. I kept, scratching at my leg, and this one day, and I looked at it. And I'm going to show you right now. This right here. You can see that it is a perfect circle. And it just gets dry. I scratch at this all the time. You can see how big it is compared to my fingernail. It's hard. And it goes like maybe like a 3/4 of an inch to an inch into my leg. It's just like a solid scar tissue mass. I had that about halfway through my 18th year. I noticed that when I was hanging out at my friend Andrew Zavacki's house, or I think it was his apartment. He had moved out by then. So I noticed that on my leg, and as far as I can tell, it's what people will call a scoop mark, where you kind of take a scoop of tissue out of the epidermis or the dermis, depending on how deep it goes, the skin in layman's terms. So I noticed that that's never gone away. I'll be 34 tomorrow, and I was about 18 when I noticed that. So it's been 16 years that I've had this. Almost 16 years. It was into my 18th year, so like halfway through my 34th year, it'll be a full 16. Anyway, so I wanted to show you that I do have a mark there. I've also got some other marks on both of my ankles. Here's one of my ankles, if you can see it. I'm going to point to it and try to get the camera on it here. Maybe come from this side. So I have a mark right here. Here. There's another one there. They go all the way around my ankles. I've got like 3 or 4 on each leg at the bottom on my ankles. Don't know where they came from. Those popped up probably like 6 years ago. It almost looks like something had me either strapped or hung up upside down at one point. And so anyway, I wanted to get to the other two encounters I've had here. So going back, after that, I had my next encounter when I was 22 years old. At this time, I was living in Tempe, Arizona, and I remember the craziest feeling. Okay, I walked into the bedroom. I walked into my room. So I was going down the hall. Walked through into the bedroom door, like I'm gonna go into my room to go work on some music and do some singing or recording or whatever. And as I'm walking into the bedroom, I literally, like, it felt like I almost kind of like blacked out, but not like a full blackout, almost like a phase shift. I don't know how to explain it, but I remember finding myself standing in a big silver hallway with a long glass window. And when I say long glass window, I mean like it wrapped like all the way around. I remember looking at it, and I could see the glass. Let's see if I can try to draw this out for you here. So I'm right here, standing in the hallway. Here's the hall, and it wraps around. It goes over probably like 7 or 8 feet this way, and wraps around this way. And I can see this, this glass window that goes back behind me this way, and it wraps all the way around. There's no break in it. It's a solid window that just keeps wrapping. And then at the top there's like a little notch that goes out like in an L shape that comes down, and then it connects to the rest of the ceiling. And at the bottom there's a little L shape that the same thing. It goes up maybe like 5 or 6 inches. Comes up from the floor. So this is the floor. This right here is a little like notch that comes up to connect to the glass window, and then you actually have the window that comes up, and then it does it again like a reverse L, coming back out and then up to the ceiling. And I could literally see the earth out this window, like this big. I could see all the little like clouds and everything all over it, and the the different land masses. And I was like looking down, and I could literally see the United States. I could see, South America, North America. I could see cloud coverage, the North Pole. I could see ice. You name it, I could see all of it. I could see the ocean all up in here. Anyway, so I'm looking at the earth. I see stars. And then I start doing like a double take. So what I do is I walk over to this glass window, and I start like knocking on it. Kind of like at first I touched it, and then I start kind of like tapping to like see if I'm like dreaming or something. And then I start like beating on the window. So at that point, that's when I start just like beating on the glass, and I could hear this. I don't know if it's actual glass or if it was plastic or some kind of an acrylic, polymer, or whatever. But I'm just hitting that thing as hard as I can, and it wasn't shattering. It was like it kind of gave just a slight bit. I could hear the sound on it when I'm pounding on it, just boom, 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 boom. And at that point, it hit me, that I was actually standing in the hallway
of an actual ship looking at Earth from what I would believe is at least a few thousand miles away, several thousand miles actually, being able to see the Earth in its entirety, you know, at this distance, you know, if that was me looking out that window, and that's how big it was, on an 8-foot window, I could only imagine that I was pretty far. The thing that hit me first is I don't see the moon, and I don't see the sun. I could see the shadows on the Earth. So my speculation is that the moon was behind that ship, and then the sun was behind that, and then casting its shadow, because I could literally see the daylight on the Earth. And I could see a slight shadow that was starting to come over from the east side. And my guess is that we were approaching maybe the afternoon, so they could see some darkness. I believe it was right here. It was like kind of like a shadow, and then over here was all lit up on this side right here. So anyway, I remember seeing the shadows, and then that's when I started to walk to my right. And so, just kind of go back to this little diagram here. And so, I walked this way, you know, to my right. And as I'm walking along this inside wall, I go around this corner and I find a doorway that's, you know, over here. And I try to go in and start walking through here, and that's when something came up behind me, like probably like right here. That's when it was standing behind me, because I was right here and it was behind me. And when I got to that door, it was just darkness in that doorway. I could see what looked like kind of like maybe like a cabinet or something on the inside of it. It was all rounded and beveled out, and it looked really strange. Looked like almost like a medical cabinet. And then it was just darkness. And as soon as I rounded that corner trying to go into that doorway, I heard this like kind of like a clicking on my right side, right behind my ear. And I started to turn to look back at it, and then boom, I'm back in my bedroom at that point. I'm literally just like standing, and I'm facing the opposite direction that I had started. So when I walked into the room, I was facing west, and then when I was back in my room, I'm facing east, almost like I was going to walk back out the door. And it was the weirdest feeling, because as soon as that happened, like within that split moment of the snap of, you know, me hitting Earth, or going, you know, from the ship back to Earth, it was like it wasn't a falling feeling. It was almost like electricity was like passing through my whole body. But like the feeling of that you get whenever you get kind of faint or lightheaded is what it felt like. It felt like I got lightheaded, and then like an electrical kind of pulse through my body, almost like my heart was giving out. And so as soon as I kind of, you know, collected myself standing there in the room, I left the room again, and this time I run out, and my mom and her boyfriend Lou are out in the kitchen area sitting at the dining table. And I say to them, what had just happened? I was like, hey, she's never going to believe this. And I said, you know, I was literally just standing in an alien spaceship, pounding on a window. I thought I was never going to see you guys again. And I was kind of disappointed. You know, they looked at me like, what did you take? What are you on? Do you need psychological help? And at that point I realized that, you know, that I should just keep my mouth shut. Because you're going to get these people, and it could be family or friends or people you don't know. They're going to come along and they're going to say, you know, that you're full of it, that you're crazy, that you need mental help, that what happened to you is just a figment of your imagination, that you're sleepwalking, that you've got sleep paralysis, night terrors. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Just like explaining UFOs with the military, they'll say, oh, it was swamp gas, or it was a balloon, or you know, whatever, it was a lens flare, you know. And it's like, yeah, that much detail comes from swamp gas and lens flares, or that much detail, or being there and knowing that you're actually there, like I am right here, right now. That's all hallucination, or it's drug induced, or it's it's something wrong with my head, and it's not. Um, so I felt like kind of betrayed at that point, especially uh, at that point, thinking that maybe my mother would believe me. And of course, this is when I was 22. This is before, of course, she approached me a few years later, back in like 2009 or 10, I can't remember it. But when she came to me after she talked to my brothers and sisters, and talked to me about the first encounter. So this was a few years before that. But anyway, so that had happened. And then, of course, just a couple weeks ago, I was sitting right here in this chair. So this is where my story comes to an end. I was sitting here on this chair, and what I did is I was looking back like this, right? And it was about 10 o'clock in the morning. So I looked back, I saw that it was 10 o'clock. And so I came back over, I grabbed my phone, and I kind of thumbed through it, checked some messages, and I look over at the TV, this TV here, and I set it, to a cartoon. I turned the cartoon on real quick, and then what I did is I looked back at my phone for a second, and it felt like I closed my eye for just like a blink while I'm holding my phone. And then I looked back at the clock just to double check, and it was still 10 o'clock. And so when I turned and I sat here on the end of the couch, or this ottoman, whatever, in the chair, I sat here and was kind of just sitting for a second thinking, and then I looked back over at the clock, and it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So somehow, of me like spending not even a couple of minutes sitting here on this chair, this exact chair I'm sitting at now, I lost slightly over 4 hours of my time. And I even posted it on, I think it was Facebook. I might have even done Twitter too, but I'm pretty sure it was just Facebook. I put something like, I just lost 4 hours of time, and I don't know what happened, I don't know where it went. And of course, my wife, she knows my stories. Amanda, she knows my story, beginning to end, everything that's happened to me. And she says, oh, maybe it was the aliens. Maybe they came and they got you, Rob. And I said, seriously? You're going to start this right now? So I had like a kind of a spark of insanity, a moment where I was like, am I losing it? Am I going crazy? But it hit me, and then I kind of laughed it off, and then I was like, yeah, haha, that's really funny of you to say. I can't believe you would say something like that. But then I was like, yeah, you're probably right. I probably got taken out of here for a little bit. They did something. So anyway, sorry to take up a little over an hour and 3 minutes of your time. I hope you enjoyed this 6 or 7 encounters that I've had. And I'm sure that we'll have more. So thank you so much for taking your time to sit here and listen to my stories of my true life events. And I hope this inspires you and others to come out with your versions of the truth as well. And we really need it. We need more people to come forward with their stories, so people will understand that this is real. It's really happening. It's not a figment of our imaginations. We're not crazy. It's not drug induced. It's real, and not to bag on anybody that's religious. I believe in aliens. I know that they exist. I've seen them, and I wouldn't say that I'm religious. I would say I'm very spiritual, but when it comes to believing what's in a book versus what's something that I've actually seen and touched or been around, I'll take the aliens any day over religious beliefs. Now, when it comes to being spiritual, it's a whole other thing. I believe that spirituality is something within all of us. It has nothing to do with religion or theology in itself. But that's just my belief, my take on it. So you can be spiritual, you can be emotional, you can be human. But until the day comes that I physically see something that's in a book of theology, I'm going to stick with my aliens, and I know that they are obviously way more advanced than us, and they have a lot more control over our day-to-day lives and the outcome of our own civilization. So, message me, email me, send me your thoughts, your stories, criticism, I don't care what it is. And thanks again. Tune in for more music, art, you name it, whatever you want to view that I have up. So I do quite a bit. Alright, love you guys. Stay true to yourselves. Peace, love, unity, and respect. And I will see you later.